I was 38, broke, exhausted, and staring at the flickering fluorescent lights of the Hale Logistics office for what felt like the thousandth hour that week. My wrists ached from typing spreadsheets and sending endless reports. My eyes burned from staring at monitors that felt like windows into a world that wasn't mine. Marcus Hale leaned against the doorway, the usual smug grin plastered across his face. "Cole," he said, voice dripping with that fake charm he always reserved for the people he planned to grind into the ground. "I need the East Coast projections on my desk by tonight. No excuses. You're staying late." I forced a smile. "Sure, Marcus. Sure I'd stay late again. Sure I'd skip dinner, miss my kid's soccer game, and watch my own life slowly dissolve into company profits he'd pocket without a thought." Marcus didn't care. He never did. For years he'd overworked me, made me think I was lucky to have a job at all, and slowly chipped away at my confidence. Promotions, never mine. Bonuses, always not quite enough for someone in my position. Recognition, he gave it to his favorites while I stayed invisible, but I tolerated it. Why? Because I needed the money, because I had bills. Because I told myself like a mantra that maybe someday, somehow, I'd get the upper hand. The crushing weight of it all had been grinding me down for years. I'd missed birthdays, anniversaries, and countless dinners. I remembered one evening, sitting alone in my car after an 8-hour shift, staring at the dashboard like it was a confession booth. I whispered to myself, "I'm just surviving, that's all." But surviving didn't feel like living. I hated myself a little for feeling trapped, for letting Marcus define my worth, for letting him squeeze everything I had out of me without mercy. And yet, I couldn't walk away, not yet. Then it happened. It was a Tuesday morning when the first crack appeared. I was organizing invoices in the supply closet, yes, the supply closet, when my phone buzzed. Email from an anonymous account. "Check the shipping manifests from last Friday. Look for anything unusual." I frowned, strange. Our company didn't usually receive cryptic emails like this, especially not to me. I shrugged it off. Maybe spam, maybe a joke. But curiosity is a dangerous thing when you're already burned out. By lunchtime, I pulled up last Friday's shipping logs. Nothing unusual at first glance. But then, a pattern. Boxes labeled as office supplies were being sent out, hundreds of them, to addresses not on any client list. Not even close. Some were PO boxes. Some were private residences in other states. I frowned deeper. I pulled out the names. Ronan Briggs, T. Marshall, H. Klein, none of them clients. None of them vendors. And nothing in our company records mentioned them. I felt a jolt in my gut. This wasn't logistics for business. This was logistics for something else. Something secret. Something illegal. I stayed late that night again. But this time it was different. My fingers flew over the keyboard, cross-referencing addresses with shipments, checking inventory logs, tracking package IDs. And then I found it. A shipment labeled Confidential Hale Logistics, leaving the warehouse Friday night. No employee assigned besides me, and the delivery manifest signed by Marcus Hale himself. I printed the page and stared at it, heart racing. For the first time, Marcus wasn't just my boss. He was a criminal. And somehow I'd stumbled onto it. I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. Fear because I knew what I had just discovered could ruin him, and maybe ruin me if I got caught snooping. Excitement because for the first time in years, I felt like I held a piece of power. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the stacks of shipping logs, the PO boxes, the names I couldn't place. I kept thinking about Ronan Briggs, the guy Marcus kept calling, whispering about. He had that quiet control over everything, like a ghost running the entire operation behind the boss's back. I wondered how long this had been going on, how many shipments had passed under my nose, how many lies I'd been fed just to keep me working late and thinking I was doing a good job. By dawn, I'd made a decision. I couldn't confront Marcus directly. Too dangerous. He had eyes everywhere, and if he suspected I knew too much, my career, or worse, would be over. I had to gather proof, quietly, piece by piece, like a puzzle that might take months to complete. But I couldn't wait months. I had to start somewhere, and the shipping logs were my entry point. I drove to the warehouse early before anyone else arrived and pulled out the files I had printed. I started making photocopies of manifests, invoices, everything that hinted at irregularities. I noticed the time stamps. Shipments went out late at night, sometimes after I'd left for the day, sometimes on weekends. I memorized the patterns where the trucks went, which drivers were involved. Everything, every little detail was evidence, and I treated it like treasure. Late that afternoon, I found myself in the break room, pretending to sip coffee while watching Marcus's every move. He was charming, laughing with one of the junior managers, passing off the casual Friday morning meeting as if it were just another day at a regular office. Nobody suspected, and yet I knew. I knew what he was hiding behind that perfectly tailored suit and that polished smile. I started asking questions, carefully, casually, to coworkers. Not directly about the shipments, but about schedules, deliveries, and office routines. Everyone answered politely, some nervous, some dismissive. I could tell a few had noticed things, maybe suspected, but no one was willing to talk. Everyone had bills, responsibilities, and fear. Fear kept the truth buried, and Marcus knew it. A week later, I finally got my first break. I was running an inventory check and noticed an unlocked office storage room near the back dock. I hadn't seen it before. Marcus had always been careful to keep me away from that area. But this time, the door was cracked and curiosity overpowered caution. I slipped inside. Stacks of crates lined the walls, some labeled innocuously with office supply names. But then I saw it, a partially opened crate with boxes inside that had no markings at all. I crouched down and peeked inside. Hundreds of unmarked envelopes neatly stacked, some with labels that matched addresses I had traced back to illegal shipments. My heart raced. This was it, the smoking gun, the proof I needed. I started taking pictures with my phone, careful to keep them hidden. Each photo felt like a victory and a risk at the same time. If Marcus found me here, if even one person saw me taking these pictures, I could be fired, or worse. My pulse throbbed in my ears as I snapped the last photo and slipped out before anyone noticed. That night, I went home and spread everything out on my kitchen table. Shipping manifests, delivery receipts, photos of unmarked crates. The sheer scale of it hit me. Marcus wasn't just running a small side business. He had an entire network, a distribution chain, hidden under the guise of a legitimate logistics company. And for years, I had been feeding it unknowingly, carrying his packages, verifying his manifests, sending invoices, all for a cutthroat criminal operation. I sat there for hours, staring at the evidence, trying to figure out my next move. I needed help, but who could I trust? If I went to the authorities too soon, Marcus's people could get wind of it. I didn't want to put anyone else in danger, and yet doing nothing felt like complicity. I was trapped between fear and morality. That's when I remembered something, an email I had received a month earlier, almost deleted by mistake. It was from a vendor complaining that a shipment hadn't arrived, but it included a tracking number that didn't match any of our legitimate orders. I dug through my files, cross-referenced it with the manifests I had copied. The name on the shipment matched one of Marcus's secret recipients. I realized that if I followed these breadcrumbs, I could trace the entire network. I started late nights mapping out addresses, tracking times, and matching them with the company's internal schedules. Each connection made the picture clearer, more damning. Marcus's empire of lies was massive, bigger than I had imagined. And now, I held the knowledge that could topple him. But then I remembered Ronan Briggs. If Marcus had a partner, someone managing the hidden side of the business, he wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. I couldn't act rashly. I had to be smart. I made a plan to gather more concrete evidence without alerting anyone. Cameras, documents, photos, copies of manifests, and records of phone calls. Every step I took had to be calculated, precise, and discreet. The next few days were a blur of nerves and focus. I moved through the office like a ghost, pretending to be the same overworked cog I'd always been. Marcus smiled at me in passing, tossing casual good job comments that felt like poison, but I ignored them. I had work to do, a hidden mission that required patience. Every time he walked by, I forced myself to act normal, hiding the storm that was building inside me. Late that evening, after the office had emptied, I slipped back into the warehouse. I had memorized the shipping schedules, the way the night crew moved, the times Marcus's truck left the dock. Everything aligned with my investigation. My hands were clammy, my heart racing, not with fear but with anticipation. I crouched behind a stack of pallets, scanning the crate labels. Office supplies, miscellaneous items, the usual covers. But then I spotted a crate with a different label, unmarked, heavy, and out of place. I had been tracking this exact shipment for a week. Its destination wasn't in any system, and the delivery was scheduled for midnight. I pulled out my phone, taking pictures carefully, hiding behind the pallets. Then I saw him, Ronan Briggs. He stepped out from the shadows, clipboard in hand, quietly supervising the loading. He moved with confidence, a man used to power behind the scenes. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just a small operation, it was organized, calculated, and deadly efficient. I took more pictures. Every movement, every signature, every box documented. Hours felt like minutes as I pieced together the operation. By the time I left the warehouse, I had enough evidence to start linking everything Marcus had been hiding. That night I couldn't sleep. I went over every shipment in my head, replaying the movements, the addresses, the patterns. Each connection made the web clearer, and the weight of what I had discovered pressed down on me. Marcus wasn't just my overbearing boss. He was running a full-blown criminal side business while pretending to manage a legitimate logistics firm. I spent the next day cross-referencing names from the manifests with social media profiles, public records, even Google Maps street views. The amount of detail I collected was staggering. Every PO box, every address, every unmarked shipment became a piece of the puzzle. I realized that if I presented this correctly, law enforcement wouldn't be able to ignore it. By midweek, I had a plan. I needed one final piece of proof, the shipment scheduled for Friday night. I had observed patterns long enough to predict it. I set up my phone to capture discrete video and positioned myself in a location where no one could see me, but I could document everything. Friday night arrived. The warehouse was almost silent, only the night crew moving with their usual rhythm. I felt my heart thudding in my chest, the adrenaline keeping my hands steady. The unmarked shipment arrived on schedule. I captured everything, the crate being unloaded, Ronan Briggs supervising, signatures being signed. It was undeniable. Then came Marcus. He walked through the warehouse, his usual charm in place, inspecting the shipment as if it were ordinary. He didn't see me, he never suspected. I snapped the final photo. This was it, the smoking gun. Months of observation, evidence collection, and careful planning had led to this moment. I left the warehouse feeling both exhilarated and terrified. I had what I needed to expose him, but I also knew that the next steps had to be precise. One mistake could ruin everything. Over the weekend, I met with a lawyer I trusted, someone who specialized in corporate fraud. I laid out the situation, showing him the documents, manifests, photos, and videos. He leaned back, nodding slowly. "You've done all the hard work," he said. "We just need to make sure your evidence is secure and that your identity is protected. Once law enforcement is involved, there's no turning back." That night, I reflected on how far I had come. Years of overwork, humiliation, and silent suffering had finally given me something valuable: perspective. I wasn't just a cog in Marcus's machine anymore. I was someone who could see through the lies, navigate the hidden networks, and take action. Monday morning, I returned to the office with a new mindset. I still pretended to be the obedient, overworked employee, but internally everything had changed. Every casual comment Marcus made, every demand, every condescending glance was fuel. He had underestimated me for years, assuming I was too scared or too loyal to act. He was wrong. During a coffee break, I overheard Marcus on the phone. His tone was low, urgent, unlike the confident persona he maintained around the office. "Make sure the next shipment isn't traced," he said. "No one can know we're moving it through normal channels. Double-check the PO boxes." My pulse quickened. He was worried, and that worried him enough to let me slip under the radar. I had the upper hand, and he didn't even know it. That night, I returned to my apartment and laid out all the evidence again. I realized the importance of redundancy. Digital copies, cloud backups, physical copies hidden in different locations. Every piece of information had to be untouchable. Marcus might try to destroy evidence if he suspected anything, so I prepared for contingencies. I also began reaching out to some of the warehouse staff discreetly. A few had noticed irregularities, suspicious shipments, and unexplained schedules. Most were terrified, afraid of Marcus's wrath, but a couple were willing to provide statements anonymously if needed. I took notes, building a network of quiet allies. By the end of the week, I had mapped out Marcus's operation almost completely. Every shipment, every drop-off, every courier and PO box was accounted for. I could see the entire empire he had been running in plain sight, hidden behind the facade of a legitimate logistics company. And then it hit me, the power of patience. For years I had endured abuse, exhaustion, and humiliation. And for years Marcus had thought he was untouchable. But patience, careful observation, strategic planning, and deliberate action had given me control. I wasn't powerless anymore. The following Monday, I walked into the office with a quiet confidence I hadn't felt in a decade. Marcus greeted me with a grin, asking about the reports I had compiled over the weekend. I smiled back, nodding politely. Inside, I was already plotting the next step. He had no idea that the overworked, invisible employee he had ignored for years was now the one who held the evidence that could destroy him. And soon, Marcus Hale's empire would start to crumble, one shipment, one invoice, one unmarked crate at a time. By Wednesday, the tension had shifted. I wasn't just observing anymore, I was acting carefully, strategically. Every shipment I documented, every photo I took, every manifest I cross-referenced was a step closer to taking Marcus down. But I also knew I had to play it smart. One misstep, one suspicious glance, and the entire operation could collapse, or worse, I could be caught. That morning, Marcus called me into his office. His smile was sharper than usual, the kind of grin that promised both charm and danger. "Cole, I need a full inventory check completed by tonight," he said, leaning casually against the desk. "I trust you'll handle it properly. No mistakes this time." I nodded, outwardly obedient while my mind raced. "Of course, Marcus. I'll double-check everything." As I left his office, I felt a mix of adrenaline and calm focus. The cracks were appearing in his perfect facade, and I was the one watching them widen. My warehouse visits had become almost nightly excursions, each one revealing more pieces of the puzzle. And the more I learned, the clearer the full picture became. That evening, I returned to the warehouse with a plan. I knew the next shipment would be critical. It was larger than any I had tracked before, and its delivery destination didn't appear in any records. I positioned myself carefully, phone ready, and waited. The night crew moved efficiently, unaware of my scrutiny. Then I saw him, Ronan Briggs, approaching the crate. His presence was always intimidating, precise, controlled. I watched as he checked labels, scanned barcodes, and oversaw the loading. My pulse quickened, but my hand stayed steady. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 100 times. Every photo, every video clip, every note I took now mattered more than ever. I snapped several discrete photos as Ronan finished checking the shipment. Then Marcus appeared, unexpectedly early. My stomach dropped, but I stayed behind the pallets, invisible. He walked right past me, inspecting the crates, murmuring instructions to Ronan, completely unaware that I was there. By the time the shipment left, I had captured everything. The proof was overwhelming. Ronan, the crates, the unmarked shipments, Marcus's direct involvement. I knew I had the smoking gun, and I also knew I had to act carefully to ensure it was used effectively. Over the next few days, I began planning the next phase. I needed to involve law enforcement without tipping Marcus off. I reached out to my lawyer again, showing him the latest photos, videos, and documents. He reviewed everything and nodded gravely. "This is airtight," he said. "If we move carefully, Marcus won't see this coming." I also began documenting Marcus's behavior in the office. The subtle intimidation, the microaggressions, the way he played favorites, and the constant pressure he placed on me and my coworkers. It was all part of the story, part of the context that would show not just his illegal side business, but the human cost of his manipulation. By Friday, I felt ready. I had gathered months of evidence, created backup copies, and mapped out the entire network. Marcus thought he was untouchable. He thought the overworked, invisible employee he ignored for years was powerless. He was wrong. That evening, I prepared my files for transfer to the authorities. Everything was encrypted, backed up, and duplicated. I even set up a secondary email to send the documents anonymously if needed. The stakes were high, but the payoff was greater. I could finally reclaim control over my life. The following Monday, federal agents arrived at Hale Logistics. I watched from a distance as Marcus was led out in handcuffs, his usual confidence replaced by panic. Ronan Briggs was detained as well. My evidence had been airtight, and justice was finally being served. Afterwards, I contacted the warehouse staff and coworkers who had been quietly observing the irregularities. I reassured them that they were safe, that the nightmare was ending. Some admitted they had suspected for months but didn't know how to act. Others were relieved, finally able to breathe without fear. In the weeks that followed, the company was reorganized under government supervision. Marcus's assets were frozen and his network dismantled. I watched from the sidelines, knowing that my patience, planning, and courage had made this possible. I wasn't just a victim of overwork anymore. I was the catalyst for change. Through it all, I reflected on what this experience had taught me. Years of being overworked and underestimated had built in me a kind of quiet resilience. I learned the power of observation, the value of patience, and the strength that comes from careful, deliberate action. Marcus had thought he could break me, but all he did was prepare me for the moment when I could take control. By the time I started my new job at a smaller, fairer logistics firm, I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't rich, I wasn't famous, but I had something far more valuable: freedom. Freedom from exploitation, freedom from fear, and freedom to live life on my own terms. Sometimes I still think about Marcus, about the empire he built on deception, intimidation, and overwork. I don't feel anger anymore. I feel clarity. Every long night, every moment of exhaustion, every day of being underestimated, it all taught me that resilience and intelligence can overcome even the most powerful adversaries. And now, whenever I walk into my office, watch coworkers collaborate respectfully, and see the difference between fear-driven management and leadership rooted in fairness, I smile. I know what it feels like to be trapped and undervalued, and I know what it feels like to reclaim control, expose the truth, and turn the tables. Marcus Hale overworked me for years, pushed me to my limits, and thought I'd stay silent. But he forgot one thing: patience, careful observation, and strategic action are more powerful than brute authority. I wasn't just a worker under his thumb. I was the one who finally brought him down. By the start of the next week, everything had shifted. I was no longer the overworked, invisible employee Marcus had dismissed mentally for years. I had leverage now, proof, patterns, and documents that could bring him down. But the challenge wasn't just having the evidence. It was executing the plan without tipping him off. I spent Monday quietly observing Marcus in the office, watching for any signs he suspected something. His usual swagger was there, but every now and then I caught him glancing at the warehouse cameras, his brow furrowing for a split second. Maybe he was worried, maybe he wasn't. Either way, I stayed calm, acting normal, keeping my cards close to my chest. That evening, I set out for the warehouse one more time. I had planned this meticulously. Capture any final evidence, verify the shipment logs, and cross-check the addresses for every unmarked crate. The night crew was smaller than usual, only 2 guys handling the loading, but I recognized them from previous shifts. They didn't notice me slipping into the shadows. I crouched behind a stack of pallets, phone in hand, and watched as the first crate was unloaded. It was labeled the same as all the others, office supplies, but I knew better. Ronan Briggs arrived, clipboard in hand, supervising the process like a seasoned commander. He glanced around, checking the crates, scanning barcodes, making sure everything matched the manifest. Then Marcus appeared. I froze, heart hammering. He stopped near the crates, inspecting them as if nothing was unusual. He muttered instructions to Ronan, gesturing toward the shipping dock. For a moment, he looked directly in my direction. My stomach clenched, but I held my position, keeping perfectly still. He didn't see me. I snapped multiple photos and recorded a short video of the entire process. Every crate, every signature, every subtle handoff documented. This was the final piece, the evidence that would allow law enforcement to connect Marcus to the entire network. When I left the warehouse that night, I felt a strange combination of fear and exhilaration. The stakes were higher than ever. If Marcus found out, he could retaliate. But if I succeeded, the empire he had built on lies and exploitation would finally collapse. The next morning, I met with my lawyer again. We went through all the files, pictures, and videos, organizing them into a comprehensive report. My lawyer nodded, impressed. "You've been meticulous," he said. "This is enough to ensure Marcus can't weasel out of it. But remember, timing is everything. We need law enforcement to act decisively." I spent the next few days securing backups, encrypting files, and preparing contingency plans. Every night, I reviewed the shipment logs, the warehouse layouts, and the schedules. I even mapped out routes Marcus used for his unmarked deliveries. I felt like a strategist planning a silent war. Only this war wasn't just about winning. It was about survival and justice. By Thursday, federal agents were ready. I handed over the compiled evidence personally, walking them through the details, answering questions, and providing context. They took everything seriously, nodding at my notes, examining the photos and manifests. One agent leaned over the files and said, "You've done all the hard work for us. We just need to move carefully now." That afternoon, Marcus called a last-minute meeting with the senior staff. I watched from my cubicle, pretending to work, as he barked orders and issued deadlines. The confidence in his voice sounded brittle now, forced. Something had shifted in the air. I didn't yet know if he suspected me, but I could feel the tension tightening like a noose around the office. Friday night, I stayed late once more. Not at the warehouse this time, but at home, monitoring the shipment tracking systems online. I watched the crates leave the docks, tracking their movements, confirming that the federal agents had taken preliminary steps to intercept them. My stomach churned with adrenaline. Everything I had worked for, the months of observation, the late nights, the careful documentation, was finally paying off. Early Saturday morning, I received a call from my lawyer. "They're moving in. Marcus and Briggs are being detained. Thanks to your files, they won't be able to destroy anything. Be careful." I drove past the office, watching from a distance as Marcus was escorted out in handcuffs, his usual arrogance replaced by panic and disbelief. Ronan Briggs followed, handcuffed as well. I felt a rush of relief, satisfaction, and an odd sense of calm. Justice had arrived, not because I wanted revenge for the sake of anger, but because truth and patience had finally won. Over the next week, I reached out to coworkers who had been affected by Marcus's schemes. Some had been quietly loyal, others had been victims of exploitation. I reassured them, explained the situation as much as I could, and ensured they understood they were safe. A few admitted they had suspected something for months but didn't have the courage or proof to act. Together, we processed the relief, the anger, and the satisfaction that comes from seeing justice served. During this time, I reflected on the years I had spent under Marcus's thumb. The endless overtime, the missed family events, the subtle and overt humiliations, all of it had been part of my preparation. I realized that resilience isn't just enduring hardship, it's learning, observing, and waiting for the right moment to act. Marcus had underestimated me, assuming compliance and fear were enough to control me. He was wrong. I also thought about the warehouse staff. Many had been afraid to speak up, trapped in fear of losing their jobs or worse. Now, with Marcus's criminal operations exposed, they could finally breathe. Seeing the relief on their faces reminded me that this wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who had been exploited, every worker who had been overworked, undervalued, and ignored. By the end of the week, the company was under temporary federal management. Marcus's assets were frozen, his illegal network dismantled, and his influence eradicated. The difference between fear-driven leadership and fairness became painfully obvious. I had learned that no matter how powerful someone seems, patience, strategy, and evidence-backed action can level the playing field. Weeks later, I started a new job at a smaller logistics company. The hours were fair, the management respectful, and the work rewarding. I wasn't rich, but I was free. Freedom was the most valuable reward. Freedom from exploitation, freedom from fear, freedom from being trapped in someone else's game. Sitting at my new desk, I looked at my coworkers collaborating, laughing, and genuinely respecting one another. I smiled, remembering my years of overwork and invisibility. For the first time in decades, I felt in control of my own life. Every long night, every moment I thought I was powerless, every instance of being belittled by Marcus had prepared me for this. Marcus Hale overworked me for years. He thought he could break me. But he didn't know that observation, patience, and strategic action could be more powerful than authority, intimidation, or money. He didn't know that the employee he underestimated would one day hold the proof of his entire empire and use it wisely. And now he had nothing. Sitting in my new apartment that first weekend after Marcus was gone, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The weight I had carried for years, the exhaustion, the humiliation, the silent anger, had lifted. For the first time, I felt like I could see my life clearly, without the constant shadow of a man who thrived on control and fear. I thought back to the countless late nights, the missed family dinners, the early mornings when my body felt like it belonged to someone else. Every spreadsheet I had entered, every shipment I had tracked, every "sure," Marcus muttered with gritted teeth, it had all led to this. The patience, the meticulous documentation, the courage to act carefully, these were the tools that had dismantled an empire built on lies. Even now, when I passed the old Hale Logistics building on my way to the grocery store, I slowed down. The lights were off, the sign faded, the place eerily quiet. I imagined Marcus pacing inside, furious, powerless, and humiliated. A small part of me felt satisfaction, not cruelly but justified. He had underestimated every overworked, invisible employee he thought he could control. He hadn't counted on someone quietly learning the rhythms of his operation, documenting everything, and refusing to be intimidated. I started reconnecting with the people who had quietly suffered under his rule. Warehouse staff, junior employees, and even a few managers who had been aware of the discrepancies but too afraid to speak up. I wanted them to know it was over, that someone had finally stood up, and that justice had been served. Their relief was palpable, and seeing them regain their dignity reminded me why I had endured everything. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about righting wrongs, restoring balance, and proving that patience and strategy could overcome even the most ruthless people. One evening, as I watched my young son playing soccer in the park, I realized how much time I had lost. But unlike before, I wasn't consumed by regret. The past had given me lessons, not scars. Every moment of overwork, every humiliation, every quiet moment of frustration had forged me into someone capable of action, courage, and justice. I had learned that power wasn't just in money or titles. It was in observation, preparation, and the will to act when the moment was right. I even found myself thinking about Marcus sometimes, not with hatred but with clarity. He had taught me something, unintentionally, the importance of self-worth, the danger of underestimating others, and the value of patience. He had spent years overworking me, thinking I would never rise above it. But in doing so, he had prepared me for a victory that required far more than brute force. It required intelligence, careful strategy, and quiet resilience. Months passed. Federal agents completed their investigations, shutting down the illegal operations Marcus had run from the shadows. Assets were seized, shipments intercepted, and every unmarked crate and PO box was accounted for. The media briefly covered the story, headlines about an overworked employee exposing a criminal logistics empire. But I didn't seek recognition. I wanted no fanfare, no celebration. The satisfaction was mine alone. I had a new job now, one that respected my time, my efforts, and my worth. I could take weekends off, attend my kids' games, and even plan a vacation without fear of being dragged back into someone else's chaos. The freedom was intoxicating, and every time I thought about the dark years under Marcus, I felt a quiet pride. Not because I had survived, but because I had acted. Because I had reclaimed control of my life and held someone accountable for their abuse. One afternoon, a former warehouse colleague called me. "Cole," he said, voice shaky, "I just wanted to say thank you. I didn't think anyone would ever do anything about him. You proved that someone could." I smiled, realizing that my actions had ripples far beyond myself. Overworked employees who had felt powerless now had hope. The fear that Marcus had wielded like a weapon had been replaced by the quiet confidence that justice can be achieved. That even when someone seems untouchable, patience, courage, and careful action can turn the tide. Sometimes I still think about those late nights in the warehouse, crouched behind pallets, phone in hand, heart pounding as I documented every shipment. The anxiety, the fear of being caught, the tension in the office, it all felt surreal now. But it had been real. Every moment of fear had been a building block, every sleepless night a brick in the foundation of justice. I also remember Marcus's expression, the first time the authorities confronted him. The arrogance wiped from his face, replaced with panic, disbelief, and a hint of regret. He had been overconfident, thinking he was untouchable, that no one would ever question his authority or uncover his secrets. And yet here he was, stripped of power, exposed, and finally held accountable. Walking through my new office one morning, watching coworkers collaborate respectfully, and hearing laughter without fear or tension, I realized how far I had come. I was no longer the overworked, invisible employee. I was someone who had faced intimidation, exploitation, and deception, and emerged stronger, wiser, and free. Looking back, I understand now that Marcus Hale's overwork and manipulation were lessons in disguise. He taught me resilience, patience, and the power of strategy. He underestimated me, and in doing so, he set the stage for his own downfall. I had learned that real strength isn't about dominance. It's about observation, preparation, and knowing when to act. Marcus overworked me for years, tried to break me, and believed I would stay silent. But he forgot one thing. The quiet ones, the patient ones, the ones who endure and observe, they can be the most dangerous when they decide to act. And act I did. Today, I walk into my office without fear. I watch my coworkers thrive. I spend time with my family. I sleep through the night without worry. I am free. And while Marcus Hale's name may still linger in whispers among former employees, it no longer holds power over me. I reclaimed what he tried to take. My dignity, my control, and my life. I don't boast about it. I don't post it online. But every once in a while, when I look at the photos, the manifests, the unmarked crates, and the faces of those I helped protect, I smile quietly to myself. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's patient, quiet, meticulous, and when it finally arrives, it's sweeter than anything revenge could ever taste. The man who overworked me for years thought he had all the power. He was wrong, and I knew it long before the law confirmed it.